Big Apple Blitz with Anthony Rivardo and Matt O'Leary.
Hello and welcome into another episode of Big Apple Blitz. What is going on? Matt O'Leary alongside Anthony Rivardo. Anthony, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. It's finally here, Matt. Training camp this week, only a couple days away. Finally see the Giants take the practice field, see the Jets take the practice field, and get things going for the start of the upcoming 2024 season. And that also does mean one very important thing for this channel. We're getting some more Tommy DeVito slow motion this week, and I can't wait.
I don't know. What if we get the year 6 Leap Daniel Jones slow-mo videos? Isn't he coming back to the field now? I know we didn't get to see much of him in minicamp.
He is supposed to be. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little later on in the episode. He's ready to go for the start of training camp, so definitely excited to discuss that, but still hopeful that Tommy DeVito takes over the QB1 job.
Absolutely. So in this one, it's going to be our training camp preview episode. We'll talk with you guys again on Thursday, but training camp will already be underway at that point, which is super exciting. So we wanted to hit on the biggest storylines from each team. We'll do one team first, then the second team. We'll start with the New York Jets, and kind of just going around on the offensive side of the ball is kind of where I wanted to start here. We know the quarterback situation with Aaron Rodgers coming back as the starter, but a legitimate backup quarterback in here with Tyrod Taylor and Jordan Travis as third in the pecking order. I don't expect to see a ton of Jordan Travis, unfortunately, because he was just put on the PUP list. So I don't know how much action he'll actually see in training camp in the preseason. But as we know, all eyes are going to be on Aaron Rodgers as he is making that comeback to play in 2024.
Yeah, of course. All eyes on Aaron Rodgers. He's the key to everything for the New York Jets this season. But since it is training camp, you know what you're getting with Aaron Rodgers. You're getting Aaron Rodgers. And I do think that looking at the quarterback room, it is pretty interesting. I hope that we get to see Jordan Travis at some point during the summer. Obviously, like you said, starting on the PUP list, still working back from that gruesome leg injury. When will he be healthy is a big question mark. Hopefully by the end of the summer, though, we can see him take the practice field and maybe even get a few snaps in the preseason. I think that would be really big for his potential development, but also the fact that you guys have a very competent quarterback in the backup spot now with Tyrod Taylor. I really like Tyrod Taylor. The last 2 years that he was with the Giants, I thought that he was a really good player for us. I thought at times he looked even better than Daniel Jones did last season. So Tyrod Taylor giving you high-quality backup quarterback play should not be underestimated. Obviously, it's all about Aaron Rodgers, and if the Jets are going to make that Super Bowl run, Rodgers needs to stay healthy and play at a high level. But in the worst-case scenario, this worst-case scenario is not nearly as bad as it was last year with Zach Wilson, Trevor Siemian, and some of the other guys who were taking those snaps. So I think that it's worth keeping an eye on Tyrod Taylor throughout the summer as well.
Yeah, you bring up a good point there. And, I'm sure in the second half of the episode, when we get to the Giants, we'll do more on Hard Knocks. But it just reminded me because on the most recent episode of Hard Knocks was the free agency one. And the Giants were, they made it clear, at least on the episode, that they were interested in bringing back Tyrod Taylor. And then the Jets kind of just outbid for him. And then that's when they pivoted and signed Drew Lock. But it's not uncommon for Tyrod in particular to be one of the more coveted backup quarterbacks because he has the starting experience and because frankly, in my opinion, I think he's one of the better backup quarterbacks in the NFL. So going from what was last year a major question mark, you had no idea what Zach Wilson was going to be, and then pivoting to Trevor Siemian and Tim Boyle along the way. At least like with Tyrod, when he's out there, he can operate an NFL offense, and unfortunately, the Jets just did not have that last year.
No, absolutely. And again, that's why it's so important. Like I said, the worst case scenario is not nearly as bad as last year's worst case scenario. I think that's the best way to put it, where if Aaron Rodgers is out of the lineup, even if it's for a short amount of time, you are getting solid backup quarterback play. And I do agree with one of the takes that you had there of Tyrod Taylor being among the best backup quarterbacks in the NFL. I absolutely agree with that. I think it's him. I think, Gardner Minshew's in that conversation as well. But Tyrod Taylor is in pretty elite company relative to what his position is in terms of being a backup quarterback. So I do think that was a really valuable signing for the Jets. And it's a player that I'm upset to see leave the New York Giants because I thought that he could provide some really solid snaps for us if, once again, Daniel Jones goes down with an injury. But now we'll be banking on Drew Lock and hopefully QB1, Tommy DeVito.
There you go. Sticking on the offense, the running back position, we know Breece Hall is going to be a bell cow running back. He was second in receptions for running backs, only behind Christian McCaffrey, 14th in rushing attempts, but he was on a pitch count early in the year, so I would fully anticipate him to jump into the top 10 and maybe even push top 5 in rushing. But beyond that, I think there's a story because we're looking to see who that RB2 is going to end up being. And through OTAs and minicamp, Braylon Allen, the Jets rookie that they drafted out of Wisconsin in this past draft, he was getting a majority of the touches. So what I'm looking for is to see if that maintains through training camp and these preseason games, or if Isaiah Davis, who's another rookie that they drafted, or Izzy Abanikanda, who was a draft pick from the 2023 class, if he can jump back into the fold and how that ends up shaking out.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think that's one of the more competitive roster spots on this Jets depth chart right now. I obviously think Braylon Allen is the leading man for the job and should get that job, but you do have some intriguing other players who are also competing for that spot. I still am confused by the decision to double down on the running back position in the draft and pick up Isaiah Davis this offseason. I thought that if you brought in Braylon Allen, 20-year-old running back with a lot of power out of Wisconsin, that's kind of it. You're set there at that running back spot, especially with Izzy Abanikanda in the fold. Bringing in Isaiah Davis was still confusing to me. So I guess what I'm looking for out of this Jets training camp with Isaiah Davis, what's his role looking like? Where are they playing him? Is he really being viewed as a special teamer? Is he being viewed as somebody who can mix in there on some third downs or as a backup running back? Like, what is the plan and the idea here with this draft pick that honestly didn't make a whole lot of sense to me at the time? That's something that I'll be keeping an eye on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was a head scratcher of a pick. Nothing against Isaiah Davis. I think it was just he's very similar running style to Braylon Allen, and the Jets just used a pick earlier on day 3 on the position. So it was a little bit surprising to see them go back to the well, but I think he will have a role on special teams. And honestly, I think he ends up being the third running back on this team over Izzy Abanikanda. I don't know. They seemed very excited when they drafted him last year. He's explosive, which is very different than what Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis offer. But at the end of last year, even after they moved on from Dalvin Cook, Izzy struggled to get on the field. So I just think maybe they kind of soured on him. He did get hurt last year in training camp. And missed a preseason game and a little bit of time early on in the year. And I don't know, maybe just was never able to recover, fully from that and get back in the good graces of the coaching staff.
Yeah, sometimes you get in that doghouse and it's kind of tough to get out. And oftentimes it's something out of your control as a player that prevents you from actually leaving that doghouse. Sometimes it's just injuries. And I could go over a list of Giants players in the past who have had injuries and have not seen the field due to that. And then once they're healthy, still aren't seeing the field because you lose a lot of valuable playing time there and you lose the ability to gain that trust with the coaching staff, which is why training camp and being healthy for training camp is so important. So there is still an opportunity, I think, for Izzy to carve out a roster spot and a role here if he stays healthy throughout the summer and make some nice plays in practice. But it is a little bit of an uphill battle, and they even did add Tariq Cohen to this backfield, and he's probably just being viewed as a special teamer, I would assume. But he is still technically a running back, so maybe he has an opportunity to fight and get some of those snaps in the backfield and earn his roster spot that way. I would assume that if the Jets are looking at him as a special teamer, they probably want him to be able to contribute offensively as well. So we'll see what he's able to do in those practices and in the drills for the running backs and as a return specialist.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it's going to be curious to see with the new kickoff rules if Tariq Cohen's able to carve out a role or if they go back to Xavier Gibson, who was the return guy last year for the New York Jets. And that's honestly kind of a good spot to transition to what I wanted to get into next, which was the wide receiver room, because I think outside of Garrett Wilson, it's kind of up for debate how things fall after that. Mike Williams starts on the PUP list after the torn ACL early last year in week 3. On a similar schedule, out of Robert Saleh's mouth was saying in one of his press conferences during minicamp that he should be on a similar run that Breece Hall was last year, which they started him on the PUP list and then ramped him up in August to be ready to go for the start of the season. I would expect similar things from Mike Williams, but then after that, it's who's in the slot. Is it Malachi Corley or Xavier Gipson? They leaned a lot on Xavier Gipson in OTAs and mini camps. And like, where does Lazard fall in here? There's some questions outside of Garrett, that's for sure.
Yeah, there's a few question marks. Obviously, Alan Lazard and what his future with this team is going to look like is a big question mark. And how much playing time is Malachi Corley going to get as a rookie? I'm really excited for that. He's a player who definitely caught my eye during the pre-draft process. Definitely caught the eye of my co-host on Fireside Giants, Alex. That was one of his favorite players, maybe even his favorite player in the draft process. And of course, he went to the New York Jets, which really pained Alex. And that was fun to see that play out on Fireside Giants. But I have a lot of excitement for Malachi Corley. And I do think that Mike Williams being out of the lineup and on the PUP list to start training camp should give a few practice snaps with the ones to players like Corley and Gipson and give them an opportunity to gain that chemistry with Aaron Rodgers, gain that trust from Aaron Rodgers and the coaching staff, and hopefully carve out a role for the upcoming season. I think that's going to be a big opportunity for a few of those guys playing on the back end of that lineup and in the roster. So really excited to watch Malachi Corley. It's only training camp, so how much of him are you going to see? A lot of what he does is bang, bang physicality after the catch, breaking tackles. You can't see a lot of that during training camp, but that's kind of the point here is what he can do with the ball in his hands with the pads on. Let's see him run these routes without the pads on. What's his timing like with Aaron Rodgers? Are his routes improved? Because he wasn't the best route runner during his collegiate career. You could see these things and see if he's made progress there. And then you'll add that to the fact that he is so physical after the catch when he puts the pads on. And you might start to see him form into a really solid wide receiver at the NFL level. So I actually think Malachi Corley is the player to really keep an eye on in this Jets offense and see what his route running and timing is looking like when the pads aren't on.
Yeah, I'm with you on that because as you mentioned, he's a very physical receiver and he wins yards after the catch and is not afraid to run guys over. It's going to be really curious to see how it translates in training camp. But something else that you brought up that I think is important to note and to hit on here is the relationship with Aaron Rodgers. When he was drafted, he had the quote saying like, "Oh, I want to stay in Aaron Rodgers' guest house," but in all seriousness, it is important for these rookie wide receivers and these young receivers to get the rapport with the quarterback, because if Rodgers doesn't trust him, he's not getting the football, and it's in his best interest and everyone's best interest for there to be a good relationship, quarterback and wide receiver. So seeing how that works early on in training camp and, wherever he ends up on the depth chart, I think is going to be important too.
Totally. I think that where he starts on the depth chart, though, he can definitely move his way up. I think Malachi Corley is such a dynamic player. So, like I said, I think it's going to be fun to watch him without the pads on, see what his route running and timing is looking like. And then once the pads do come on, he can make some names for himself. He can make some plays, make a name for himself in the preseason, be a standout player. And there you go. Now he's earned a bunch of playing time for the regular season. So I think that's going to be a lot of fun. And I also think it's going to be fun when we get the Jets and Giants joint practices during training camp. I'm excited to see Malachi Corley. I think that's going to be really intriguing how he matches up with maybe Deonte Banks or some of these other guys. It's kind of like practice reps that we wanted to see because we wanted him on the Giants, but at least we'll get a few of those practice reps with him in a Jets uniform instead.
There we go. Yes, looking forward to that before the Jets and Giants matchup in the preseason. Last thing on the offense before getting over to the defensive side of the football here. Is the new look offensive line. And we know who the 5 starters are going to be, but the thing that I'm looking for in training camp is how much of Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses, the 2 new tackles, do we actually see? I think they're going to be on some sort of pitch count as, both 33-year-olds and coming off an injury in 2023, excuse me. So I guess we'll get to see a lot of first round pick Olu Fashanu, which is a nice consolation prize there.
Yeah, that's really exciting. That's really what I want to see from this offensive line, because what am I going to learn about Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses through training camp? I already know what they are. They're great offensive tackles. They're veteran offensive tackles. Yes, they have health problems usually throughout their career, but when they're on the field, you know that they're rock solid. So what I want to see is the rookies, the young guys. How are they developing? Are they locking down some of the Jets' great pass rushers once the pads do come on? All of that stuff will be more interesting to me than seeing Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses. But to that same point, how are the Jets coaches kind of ramping up these guys, because they might have been banged up last year and they might have been coming off of these injuries? How many reps are they getting with the ones, or are they rotating them in and out? I always think it's interesting to see how a coaching staff balances that sort of thing. The Giants, just to make the comparison, have kind of struggled with this in recent years. They've done a lot of rotating at the guard spots. And then once we get to the regular season, it seems like nobody is prepared to play because they haven't locked anyone into a position throughout the summer. So how do the Jets kind of balance that with Tyron Smith, knowing that he's your starter week 1 at left tackle, but you also want to get your rookie first round pick on the field during practice? How do you balance that? Who gets the majority of the reps? Who rotates in? Is there a rotation? I think all of that will kind of be interesting to keep an eye on.
Yeah, without a doubt. I'm curious to see if there's a rotation as well. But even with not having Tyron Smith, let's say every single practice, like him being a veteran and such like a technician when he's out there, and we know how good he is on the field, I'm not crazy worried about that. I'm honestly I think I might be more excited to see Olu because he's more of that unknown. We know what Tyron Smith is when he's healthy. We know what Morgan Moses is. Let's see how Olu Fashanu holds up against what should be a really damn good defensive line in 2024. So I'm going to have my eye on the rookie and second year player Joe Tippmann too. Moving full time to center. He bounced between center and guard last year. I think he settles in nicely there and, really gets that relationship with Aaron Rodgers because, again, like Rodgers got to be able to trust the center that he's going to, align the offensive line the right way, get the snap right. So that's a sneaky important role on this team too.
No doubt. And that's another player that I'm really excited to see when we get to that joint practice between the Jets and the Giants, because assuming there will be some pads on and there will be some drills between the offensive and defensive lines, Dexter Lawrence versus Joe Tippmann, I need to see it. I'm really excited for that one. And then inversely, John Michael Schmitz versus Quinnen Williams. I think that'll be fun. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to the joint practices. Obviously, it's going to be a lot of fun on this channel to kind of react and break that down. But for those players that you mentioned in particular, of course, with Joe Tippmann, I think that the debate's still open because it's only been a year between him and John Michael Schmitz, who was the right pick and all that stuff. But I think it's going to be fun to just kind of see those guys compete once they take the field together during training camp.
Absolutely. So let's get to the defensive side of the ball. Not as much question marks there. Like defensive line, we know who the starters are. They're going to be good. Linebacker, same thing. Corners, kind of same thing. Really, for me, it's the safety spot. They are bringing in they brought in last year Chuck Clark. Unfortunately, he was injured, but he's replacing Jordan Whitehead. And then Tony Adams, who was a starter last year at free safety, is anticipated to come back. But probably the weakest point on this Jets team, when just looking at like starters and not looking at depth, is that safety room. So my eyes are there, and Ashton Davis, can't forget him, is back in the fold too. So that group on the defensive side is really the only one that jumps out that there might be any sort of like competition even for a starting spot or a potential weak spot on that team.
Yeah, I'm very jealous of you guys that's all you have to worry about is a potential weak spot on this team. You're like, oh, we've got all of our starters here, all pros here, pro bowlers there. We might struggle to have a day one set starter at safety. How lucky are you that this Jets team has been built up this way? But I will say, you guys have earned this. It's been a long time, a long playoff drought. So I can't be too upset with it. The Jets finally having a really good roster is not only exciting for Jets fans, but I think for football in general. So it will be obviously fun to see that safety position. Position battles are always great. And sometimes they allow players to really develop in a way that they probably wouldn't if they didn't have the competition with the added pressure of getting a starting spot. So all of those young guys competing in that safety room, maybe they will take those steps forward and develop into some pretty solid starters.
Absolutely. Let's get into the chat a little bit here while we're keeping rolling. Big Sky Jets fan was hanging with us. Says, how is the Jets running back room going to look this year? And how about those the G-men's running back room now that Saquon is gone? yeah, for the Jets, I mean, it's going to be a lot of heavy Breece Hall usage, and then I think Braylon Allen is probably second in the pecking order. For your Giants, I think it's going to be a little bit running back by committee approach here, right?
Yeah, it should be running back by committee. Saquon gone, Devin Singletary in as the lead back, but Devin Singletary has never really received a full workload throughout the entirety of a season. Maybe that happens this year and he can be a 1,000-yard rusher. He was on pace for it last year if he actually was the starter for 17 games. But I do think they've got some young players that they really like. Tyrone Tracy Jr., fifth-round rookie, very good receiving back. I think you'll see him a lot on third downs. And even Eric Gray, a fifth-round pick in last year's draft, he's another young running back who I think they like quite a bit. So I think it's going to be a committee with those three guys, and all three of them should see some decent playing time.
As Peter says, the best week is here. Football is back. That is for sure. We are really excited about that. And then follows it up with a good question down here that I wanted to pull up. Could Isaiah Oliver, supply Adams at free safety? I think he's going to have more of a special teams role. I guess that's something that I think has to be in consideration, but for more context on this, Anthony, this is the patented Joe Douglas, Robert Saleh. Let's bring in a corner. Usually they do this in the draft and convert him to safety. Isaiah Oliver played a little corner with San Fran and now is going to make the transition to safety with the Jets.
Well, that'll be interesting to watch that development. And I think that if there's any defensive coaching staff that you want to put the trust into to identify talent and transition them to a new position, we've kind of said it all throughout the offseason. Maybe we don't have the best trust for the Jets offensive coaching staff, but for the defensive coaching staff, their eye for young talent and their ability to develop that talent has been proven to be really solid. So I think that's a very exciting storyline to keep an eye on if you're a Jets fan. A player transitioning positions is always interesting, and it can be a failed experiment and it can crash and burn, but sometimes it's got that boom or bust aspect where moving a player to a new position, that's all they really needed to take that step forward and really develop into something special. So I think that he could supplant Adams at free safety, and it's totally possible. And again, if you put your trust into Robert Saleh and this defensive coaching staff, you definitely have a lot of excitement to generate for this young player.
Absolutely. And one from our guy, Johnny Boy, says, question for you both. What position battles are you looking towards during training camp that the media is not talking about? For the Jets, I really don't think there's a lot. Maybe the slot wide receiver is one that jumps out between Corley and Gibson. I think a lot of fans want to see Malachi Corley more so, and I agree with that, by the way. But I think based on what the Jets have shown in the past, they like to bring their rookies on a little bit on the slower side. So it wouldn't surprise me to see maybe more Xavier Gibson in the slot than we may be anticipating. How about for your Giants?
Yeah, honestly, there's a few position battles for the Giants, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun to keep an eye on these position battles. Right tackle stands out for the Giants, but that's kind of been talked about in the media. I think that there is one that really hasn't been discussed much. It's WR5, and I know that's kind of like, okay, who cares about the fifth receiver on the depth chart? Giants fans will, because it's right now Isaiah Hodgins, a fan favorite player who in 2022, when we made that playoff run, had that breakout season, or half of a season, really. He came on halfway through the year and just looked like, yeah, this is a starting wide receiver. He should be a big part of the offense going forward. He had the 100-yard game against Patrick Peterson in the playoffs against Minnesota, touchdown grab in that game. So Isaiah Hodgins, going into last season, it was like, okay, we've got an established starter here now. What's he going to look like throughout the rest of his tenure with the Giants? Barely played last year. Had like 3 touchdowns, 20 receptions, didn't see the field a whole lot. So now going into this offseason, what is his standing with this team? We've added more talent to the receiver spot. So this once WR2 for this roster is now WR5. Will he get cut? Will he make the roster? Now he's competing with guys like Allen Robinson, Isaiah McKenzie, and Bryce Ford-Wheaton, a second-round player or a second-year player who was an undrafted rookie last year with a 10.0 relative athletic score, freak athlete. So it's like, what is this future for Isaiah Hodgins is going to be really interesting for Giants fans in particular, because I know he is a fan favorite and everybody loves him. So I don't know if Isaiah Hodgins does have a spot on this roster, but he's going to have to work his ass off and maintain that spot throughout the training camp practices.
Interesting. Definitely something to take a note on there. Last Jets note before we get over in the Giants and for the rest of the episode here. But my last thought on the Jets is to kind of see, like, it's very obvious that there's a lot of pressure on this team this year, on the GM, the coach, the quarterback, they need to win, and like that's kind of it. Like there's a win now thing with this team. I'm curious to see like how they're able to handle that pressure and what the the talking points coming out from the organization are during training camps, and because they talk to the media nearly every day during training camp. There's going to be a lot of tough questions that are pitched to Saleh and to the quarterbacks and everyone else, and kind of just curious to see what the mindset is and the intensity. There we go, the intensity at these practices.
I think there does need to be a level of level-headedness. There needs to be an aspect of that where the team, yes, understands the expectations, but doesn't let the spotlight shine too bright. And that's kind of what I'll be looking for from those media responses. Aaron Rodgers completely understands what he's stepping into. He has to perform well this year. The Jets have Super Bowl aspirations this year, and it pretty much all rests on his shoulders. So how does he respond to that in the media? Like, what does he say? And what kind of pressure is he putting on himself? What kind of intensity does he bring to the podium? I do think all of that is going to be interesting to keep an eye on. And for Robert Saleh as well, who I think has proven to be a decent coach and a player's coach for sure. But has he proven to be a great head coach and strategist? I think the jury's still out on that personally. Maybe Jets fans are sold. Maybe some aren't. I think the jury's still out on Saleh, but this is the year where your roster looks airtight. All these positions locked in, talent across the board. Now you have your quarterback here. If he stays healthy, not a whole lot of excuses to go around for the coaching staff because it's really going to come down to the coaching staff. The talent is there. So how is it coached well? So I think it'll be interesting to see what kind of pressure is placed on Robert Saleh. What kind of pressure does he put on himself? And how does he respond to these media questions that are constantly going to be bringing up the Super Bowl aspirations?
Absolutely. And I'm with you. I think the jury's still out for me on Saleh. There's some who are definitive saying that Saleh's not the guy and he can't coach. And I'm not quite there, but there's less, but I'm not also saying like he's definitely the guy either. I think it's very TBD. For me, I give him a little bit of benefit of the doubt because of just how bad the quarterback play has been during that time. But he needs to, they need to win. They need to be a playoff team this year. So again, we'll see how they're able to handle that transition. Let's get to your New York Giants. What's the first thing you want to get into here for things to watch for in training camp?
Yeah, first and foremost, got to talk about the quarterback position. Got to talk about Daniel Jones as he makes way for year 6, hopefully going on that year 6 leap, the patented year 6 leap. So he said that he was, quote, ready to go for training camp. He's not starting on the PUP list, which is interesting because earlier you mentioned Mike Williams tore his ACL in week 3. Daniel Jones tore his ACL in week 9, not starting on the PUP list, whereas Mike Williams is. I think that's interesting to highlight because every player recovers from these injuries differently, but also we do know Daniel Jones, we can criticize him endlessly, can't criticize his work ethic, can't criticize his desire to be on the football field at all times. So you do have to praise the fact that he did his diligence throughout the summer or throughout the spring rather and winter, getting himself healthy and looking ready to rock and to roll for the start of training camp. Now, how excited are we to see Daniel Jones rock and roll in training camp? I don't know. I'm not really too thrilled about it, but nevertheless, we have to watch him play this season. And how does he play during training camp will be one of the biggest talking points. And I will say before I kind of hand this off to you and let you get your take on this, I think that there is an element of pressure added to Daniel Jones where there is like, it's very obvious that the Giants tried to move on from him this offseason. And if he doesn't play well, if he looks bad during training camp, how does the media kind of take to that? Do they place all this pressure on him? Do they start calling for Drew Lock snaps? Do they start calling for Tommy DeVito snaps? Like, what happens if Daniel Jones stinks it up at training camp? Because we've seen him have some really bad practices at training camp in the past, like that first season with Brian Dable, 2022, really bad summer practices, somehow had a great regular season. What happens if those practices this summer are really bad once again? Are there starting to be fans calling for Drew Lock to get those first team reps? I am interested to see what this pressure on Daniel Jones ends up looking like and how the media might influence the standing that he has as the QB1.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's kind of where I wanted to go with talking about the Giants quarterback room and with Daniel Jones is one, the media, but also the fans and how quick they are to turn on him this summer. Because I think most fans, it feels like most fans there's a section that is still really believers in Daniel Jones, but you get that first practice where he gets intercepted in the red zone, or whatever it may be. You get the training camp stats tweeted out. He was 6 of 12 and had 2 picks or something like that today. What's the reaction like, and how quick do they hit that panic button with him? And like, how, I guess, in a way, from the Giant side of it, like, how long is that leash for Daniel Jones this year? That to me is what I'm curious with. And if we see any of the quarterbacks, whether it be Tommy DeVito or if it be Drew Lock, really pushed to take first team reps this year, and in training camp. So that's, for me, in the quarterback room, what I'm looking at.
Yeah, I think you said it best there. I was actually about to say, what's the leash looking like for Daniel Jones? I think that is the best way to kind of put it, because you know that he's given the first team reps and he's given the starting job, but how long does it take before he maybe gets pulled from that spot, or some of those reps get shared among the other quarterbacks? I think that it's make or break for Daniel Jones. We've been saying it for the last 3 freaking years, and I can't believe we're still saying it and that he's still the starter. But nevertheless, he is. And so it's make or break right now. And in order to make sure that he doesn't break, he needs to have a good training camp summer and make a lot of plays with the first team, because the narratives will just start to shift if he's out there with the first team and he's not throwing touchdown passes to Malik Neighbors. And then, okay, well, Malik Neighbors just caught a touchdown pass from Drew Lock. Why don't we put Drew Lock in the first team? Why doesn't Drew Lock be the starter this year? Like, that's going to be really crazy to see how it kind of shifts the narrative for Daniel Jones and this Giants offense in general. But he also has a new backfield to play with. I know we kind of previewed that earlier. I think that's going to be interesting to kind of talk about. So we can talk about that next. Devin Singletary. I wrote an article about him the other day, and I took a look at his stats over those final 10 weeks of the season. With Houston last year, when he took over as a starter, he was averaging over 70 yards per game. You put that over a 17-game sample size, he was going for 1,200 rushing yards. Now he finished with 800 something because the first 7 weeks of the season, he wasn't the starter. But now going across 17 games this year, I do think there's potential to get a pretty high volume of rushing yardage out of Devin Singletary, and maybe a pretty good running output for this Giants team in general. But I do question, what is Daniel Jones's role in the running game as well? Because in 2022, when we found all that success, he was a great running quarterback and dual threat. So all of the question marks that I have for this Giants team, they all stem from Daniel Jones. The rushing attack, I actually do feel more confident in it than I think a lot of other Giants fans do. But I'm also curious to see, how does Daniel Jones contribute to that coming off of a torn ACL?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a great point, looking at the rushing attack. One is Daniel Jones's impact, but two, with Devin Singletary, I think down the stretch he was actually really good for Houston. There were a couple stinkers in there where he averaged under 3 yards a carry, but other than that, like, had some really impressive games. Didn't get in the end zone a ton, but back-to-back 100-yard games against Cincinnati and Arizona, where he went over 5 yards a carry. And we talked about it for the Giants being running back by committee, and I do think they utilize more of their backs than the Jets do. Like, I think for Breece Hall, he's probably closer to top 5 in rushing attempts this year. I don't know if Singletary gets his way up into the top 10 because of how they spread it around, but I think he's going to be the one who's utilized the most and is going to be the most effective this year. As a veteran rusher who the Giants staff knows very well from his time in Buffalo.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that connection is really important. Brian Dable already likes Devin Singletary, already knows him, and hopefully can unlock that next level of him. But the other running back that I'm keeping a very close eye on throughout the summer, Tyrone Tracy Jr. I have a lot of excitement around this guy. This to me felt like, and to Alex as well, again, I told you he was huge on Malachi Corley. It's like, if we couldn't get Malachi Corley, getting Tyrone Tracy Jr. is kind of the next best thing in some ways. He's a wide receiver converted running back rather than a running back converted wide receiver. So similar skill set, a lot of physicality. He forced 46 missed tackles last season on 130 touches. So again, similar skill set to Malachi Corley, and could be that guy that the Giants really needed to catch the ball in space, break some tackles, and add some extra yardage. Again, how do we see that take shape during training camp is questionable, but once we get into preseason, there could be an opportunity for Tyrone Tracy to be the starting running back in the backfield in a preseason game and play some really good snaps. And maybe he pushes for the starting job at some point this season. I know that's been a talking point for Giants fans. So that's a player that I am very, very excited to see take the field this year. Rookie running back Tyrone Tracy Jr. out of Purdue.
Yeah, he's a really interesting one. I think, and you mentioned this in past episodes too, I think he could end up playing a role on special teams this year too for the Giants, even if he's not like Singletary. I think we both assume is going to be up there in carries, and even if Tracy's a little bit lower on the pecking order in year one as a rookie, I think he's someone who could get on the field on special teams, on kickoffs and punt returns, and have an impact there at least. And you refresh my memory. What round draft pick was he? Sixth?
Fifth round.
Fifth round. There we go. But if you're getting a fifth round running back on the field, even just on specials in year one, I think that's already a win. And then from there, obviously, you hope that he develops and maybe eventually does become the guy for you. But I think at a minimum, you're looking at someone who has a special teams defined role for this team.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, with his tackle breaking ability, similar skill set to Malachi Corley, as we've discussed, I think that he could see a lot of playing time as the kick returner under this new format and probably make a lot of plays breaking tackles on this new kickoff format, because it seems like tackle breaking is going to be a big aspect of this new kickoff format. So Tyrone Tracy Jr. should see the field in that regard. But then moving into this tight end room, it got shredded to bits this offseason. Darren Waller was supposed to be the starter. He retires. And then they draft Theo Johnson to be his replacement. Very similar playing style to Darren Waller. Well, he's starting on a PUP list. Apparently, he has some sort of hip injury. Undisclosed. Don't really know how it happened. Don't know what went down there. But he's injured. He's not going to be there for the start of training camp. Well, when will he be healthy? Big time question mark. So I don't really know about this tight end room. It's Daniel Bellinger and then a bunch of backups that I never want to see take the field. You got Lawrence Cager, of course, New York Jets legend. And you have some other guys, Chris Manhertz, Jack Stoll. Don't want to see any of those guys on the field, to be honest. I like Daniel Bellinger, but was really excited about Theo Johnson. Was hoping to see a lot of 12 personnel. Think we're going to see a lot of 11 personnel for the Giants this year instead. So, yeah, not too happy about the fact that Theo Johnson's not going to be there. Hopefully he gets healthy soon enough. But this tight end room, not a good one. A lot of question marks.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think two tight end sets are going to be few and far between for this Giants team. I like Bellinger. I don't know how much I think I like him as a number 2 more than like a number 1 tight end, but who knows? He's still relatively young. He's a 4th rounder in 2022. Theo Johnson starting on PUP is really annoying, because I was excited about that pick. That was a tight end from this past draft that I really liked, and I think he could be a factor in the receiving game. And I'm sure we'll get to the wide receivers very shortly here, but it would be nice for Daniel Jones or whoever's throwing passes for the Giants to have that safety blanket at the tight end spot.
Yeah, it would be. And I also think that Theo Johnson brings a level of dynamic play from the tight end spot as a vertical threat. And I thought that would have been very valuable to have someone pushing vertically in the middle of the field to open things up on the outside for Malik Neighbors and Jalen Hyatt would have been really important. But that is a good transition over to this wide receiver position. Jalen Hyatt is a player to keep an eye on throughout training camp, because he's probably going to get a lot of snaps. The future of Darius Slayton feels like it's more in question than ever. I was reading, he did a spot on podcast with Keyshawn Johnson talking about how he gave the Giants an ultimatum recently and was pretty much like, I need to do this, otherwise I don't want to be here. And he's here. So how happy is he to be here is the question. And how long will he be here? Is he a trade candidate, a cut candidate by the end of the training camp period? Who knows? But kind of seeing that position battle, Jalen Hyatt versus Darius Slayton, I think that's one of the more interesting ones on this Giants team, because you would think Slayton is the starter. He's established. He's gone for 700 yards 4 times in his career. Maybe the best receiver on the Giants roster, but this team looks ready to rebuild. It looks ready to get younger and younger by the day. Jalen Hyatt being the younger option with a similar skill set to Darius Slayton, he might have a chance to overtake Slayton on the depth chart, and then Slayton gets shipped out of town for a draft pick by the end of the summer.
Yeah, that really wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. And I mean, if you listened to the show before, you know that we both are big fans of Darius Slayton's game. But, right now, looking at the Giants depth chart, Neighbors, Slayton, Wan'Dale Robinson as your top three guys. And then beyond that, you have Jalen Hyatt and Isaiah Hodgins and even veterans like Allen Robinson. It might not have the crazy high-end top talent. You're hoping Malik Neighbors can be that, and I think he can. But the depth really impresses me in this wide receiver room. Like Darius is a solid 2 or 3 option. And then you have some younger guys like Wan'Dale is still, young, going into his 3rd year in the league. And Jalen Hyatt's going into year 2 now. So I think there's a lot of upside at this position group.
Yeah, totally agreed. I think the depth on this team at the wide receiver position is tremendous. They've got at least 5 guys on this roster that I think can be quality starters for you across 17 games. Can't say that about a lot of the rosters in the NFL. So I love what they have with the depth in this wide receiver room, but who kind of emerges as that X factor and star needs to be Malik Neighbors, obviously. But then who complements him well? What does the lineup look like? Who starts? Who doesn't? Who gets cut? Again, Isaiah Hodgins, what's his future like? Darius Slayton. It will be interesting to see how it shapes out. And again, I think a lot of it will be determined throughout these training camp practices. But before we flip to the defense, I do want to talk about this offensive line. I want to talk a little bit about Evan Neal because I think that this really is the make or break year for Evan Neal. I think not only did the Giants fans sour on Evan Neal pretty quickly, but after he had that moment where he called Giants fans a sheep and referred to himself as a lion and said that they're burger flippers, called Giants fans burger flippers. When he had that moment and he turned the fan base really strongly against him, I think that he also kind of turned the coaching staff against him in many ways and the front office. And so I do feel like it's right now you have to be what we thought you were when we drafted you in the first round this summer. Otherwise, you're kind of done. And keep in mind, we didn't even see Evan Neal throughout the spring. He was dealing with an ankle injury. He didn't participate in minicamp, OTAs, not starting on the PUP list, it seems, which is a great sign. So hopefully he's out there and he's healthy for the start of training camp. But how does he look? And is he playing right tackle? Are they going to train him inside at guard? Then what do they do with Jermaine Illuminor and John Runyon? Where do those guys play? Should be a lot of interesting position battles across the offensive line because I think they really only have two established starters. Andrew Thomas left tackle, John Michael Schmitz at center, and then the other three positions I think are up to grabs, but they're all up to grabs in the sense that Evan Neal is the first domino to fall and everybody else falls into place after that.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings on Evan Neal because I hear what you're saying there with the coaching staff beginning to sour on him after those comments. And my takeaway on it is we know the fans did. They were kind of down on him after a struggling rookie season, but then you add on top of that those comments, which was not great at all. I think that would matter more to ownership, while I think the coaching staff and probably more so the GM wants him to prove that he is that guy because he is a first round pick. And I think they almost kind of want to prove that they were right to take him, seventh overall, or in the top 10 a couple of years ago. So I think that's why he's getting that opportunity. But again, kind of going back to Daniel Jones and his leash, I think we could have a conversation about how long is Evan Neal's leash here. But I think he's getting the starting nod right now, at least on paper, because of the draft pedigree, and the Giants don't want to admit that they were wrong yet with that pick.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of it, not wanting to prove or admit that you're wrong. And I've said this so many times, Evan Neal needs to have the shortest leash possible. Like I'm talking week 2, if he's let up 3 sacks in the first 2 weeks of the season, which is not outside of the realm of possibility, or if his PFF grade is like a 30 through 2 weeks, just take him out of the goddamn lineup. I don't want to see this guy play anymore if he can't at least play at a competent level through the first couple weeks of the season. So I'm really sour on Evan Neal. I really wanted to see him succeed, and I still do, because I think that he is the key to this offense. If Evan Neal becomes an average right tackle this season, then you can play Jermaine Illuminor at right guard where he's very good. You can play John Runyon at left guard where he's very good. And everything falls into place, and you probably have an average to above offensive line. And then this whole offense should be good because you've got so many playmakers in the receiving game. Then it just comes down to the quarterback. And once you plug a quarterback in there with competency in 2025, you're looking at a good offense. But again, it really is just, does Evan Neal play well, and how do the dominoes fall into place after that? But then moving over to the defensive side of the ball, the secondary is the cause for concern here because the defensive line looks sick, and there's really not a whole lot to break down. You got Dexter Lawrence, you got Kayvon Thibodeau. Let's hope he takes a big step forward. You got Brian Burns now, which should help Kayvon Thibodeau take that step forward. And then behind him, you got Bobby Okereke, Isaiah Simmons, Micah McFadden, good linebacker core. Then you take that next step. You go to the secondary. Average age of experience, they're 22.8 years old is their average age for the starters. Not a lot of experience in that group. I don't think that any of the starters have started more than 25 games in their career. This is the biggest cause for concern for me, and especially at cornerback too. I have the utmost confidence in Deonte Banks as the primary cornerback, but opposite him, Cordell Flott projected starter. But will he be the starter? I don't know. I think that is the biggest position battle this summer. Who starts at CB2, and do we even have a starting caliber talent at that position is a big question mark.
That's what I was going to go to is I really have no idea who's going to end up taking that spot. I maybe it is going to end up being Flott there, but I love Deontay Banks. Love what he did last year as a rookie. I think he's definitely, a bona fide CB1. You don't have to worry about that. But you bring up a good point. Is like, who's going to end up being that guy? I really don't know. I think that could be a potential weak spot on this defense, because there are things about this unit that I like, and I'm sure we'll get to, on the defensive side of the ball, the rest of this this team, and with the new defensive coordinator in here, I think there's upside for this group. But if there is something to hold them back a little bit, I think it is the second corner.
Yeah, completely agreed. I know a lot of Giants fans have been calling for the team to make some sort of signing, add somebody through free agency. I've been making the argument that that's not a good idea before training camp. That's like, give it 2 weeks, let Cordell Flott and these other guys get those first team reps, let them compete for this job. And then if you're still uncomfortable with the CB2 job, then bring in somebody, because Stephon Gilmore, for example, that's the player that the Giants fans really want the team to sign. They're like, okay, that immediately upgrades the secondary, brings in a veteran. Now you've got a great cornerback opposite Deontay Banks. Sure, that could be the case. And Stephon Gilmore would be a home run signing for the Giants all the way in July/August. However, you sign him now, all those developmental reps with the first team that Cordell Flott was supposed to get, that Nick McLeod was supposed to get, that Trey Hawkins was supposed to get, they go out the window because they all go to Stephon Gilmore. That's not a good idea. You need these guys to develop. That's the whole point of training camp. This is really developmental time. So if you're going to sign somebody like a Gilmore or like an immediate starter at cornerback, if you know that they're going to be an immediate starter, there's no need to sign them now. Sign them later. Sign them then. Let them take those practice reps towards the end of training camp just to get warmed up for the regular season. But let those training camp reps go to the young guys who really need them and need to develop. And let's see if Cordell Flott can become a true starting quarterback in the NFL.
Hopefully it goes better than this, but just from a timeline perspective, kind of like what happened with Dalvin Cook and the Jets last year, how they didn't bring him in till a few weeks into training camp, and they were giving, Michael Carter and Izzy Abanikanda those reps, and then got to the point where it's like, all right, we want to bring in another running back, and they do sign the veteran, and unfortunately it didn't go well for the Jets. But someone like a Gilmore who's still kicking around, like, does he need to be there the first 2 weeks of training camp? Not really, no.
And I don't think he wants to be. I think a lot of these veterans have been through, he's been to 12 training camps? I don't think he wants to go to another one. I think he probably just wants to play regular season ball if he's in good shape. So maybe do some conditioning during that bye week going up to the regular season. But you don't need him there for the start of training camp. It's kind of like ridiculous if they do end up signing someone before training camp begins. But they also do have some other veterans on the back end of the roster who can maybe compete. But just generally speaking, the cornerback room, not very confident in it other than Deontay Banks. And then you've got slot cornerback, which should be held by rookie Andrew Phillips, who they drafted in the 3rd round. But again, let's see if anybody competes with him for that and how he does as a rookie. And then the safety spot, you got Tyler Nubin, 2nd round pick. He'll be the starter at free safety most likely. And you have Jason Pinnock. But again, these are very unestablished players who are taking these starting jobs on. So just a lot of cause for concern and a lot of players to keep an eye on there in the Giants secondary. And these guys do need to start developing and taking those steps forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we'll see if they're able to do that in training camp. Obviously, that's the goal. You want a young guy to establish himself, but that's clearly going to be something to keep a note on and to watch for.
100%. And then again, like I said, with this defensive line, not too much to watch other than maybe who's the interior defensive lineman next to Dexter Lawrence. You know who your edge rushers are: Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau. Hopefully they're great. Dexter Lawrence is elite. But who's the other starting defensive lineman? That's a big question mark. I don't really know. I think Rakeem Nunez-Roches is the veteran who probably takes the job, but they do have a couple of undrafted free agent defensive linemen that I think are worth noting. Casey Rogers being one of them, and Elijah Chapman being the other. Casey Rogers out of Oregon, Elijah Chapman out of SMU. They also have Jordan Riley from last year out of Oregon as well, 7th round pick. So again, some more young and unproven talent. Eventually, one of these guys has to pan out. One of these young, unproven guys that the Giants bring in has to become quality at some point. Maybe it'll be on the defensive line, and maybe we'll get a starter out of an undrafted free agent.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to see a lot of them in the preseason, and like this is the time where you're going to see those guys. And who knows, maybe you get one of these guys hits, like Victor Cruz, undrafted guy, shines out in training camp and has a monster game against the Jets, and the rest is history.
Yeah, that's one that I will never forget. I guess that's probably a good kind of stroll down memory lane as we kind of close out this episode, I will never forget watching that preseason game. It was very late and I was very young and I was not allowed to be up that late watching that game, but I could not turn the TV off no matter what my mom was telling me. She's like, go to bed, go to bed. You got to be up for school tomorrow. I'm like, no, you have to see this kid. He is incredible. He's going to be the future of this Giants team. One-handed catch. Incredible performance from Victor Cruz. Obviously, he blows out his ACL, but then the next year, storms onto the scene, 1,500 receiving yards. Giants win the Super Bowl. That was a legendary moment in the making there. So I'll never forget that one. That's probably my favorite preseason moment ever.
Yeah, that one definitely stands out at the time from the Jet side of it. Is like, who the hell is this kid, and why is he putting up so much production? And there's a clip, I forget exactly what he says, but Rex Ryan says something very similar to that to Tom Coughlin after the game. So what a good moment there, and hopefully get something like that again, maybe when the Jets and Giants face off in a few weeks here.
Yeah, I can't wait for that. That's going to be a lot of fun on this channel. Obviously, we'll do some special planned stuff for that, and I can't wait. It's going to be plenty of fun, and really all of training camp will be, and all preseason will be. I'm excited to finally get those Tommy DeVito highlights in the preseason, those Tommy DeVito slow-mo shots during training camp. I'm juiced up, ready to see Tommy DeVito get back to work, and hopefully to see a better New York Giants football team this season.
Love it. We got a cryptic Jets tweet while we were on the air. So can we close with that on the show for today and try to decode this and see what this means here? But we got a clock, an eyeball, and a back arrow. It looks like the clock is saying 1 o'clock. So something is happening at 1 o'clock today. That's my interpretation. But what that is, I don't know.
Well, someone in the comments is saying throwbacks, and with the pointing backwards, I guess that makes sense. But the Jets' new uniforms are throwbacks, so
right. They did the uniform drop. So I thought it would make sense if they were doing, but they already have their 3 uniforms though, right? Like you can't have more than 3.
Could it be something like a behind the scenes look at the offseason in some way? Maybe something like that they're dropping?
Could be. I don't know. Maybe I like the someone commented below. I'd have to find it. It's not the top comment anymore, but Devontae Adams to the Jets announced that 1 o'clock. How about that? Would make my week start off on a pretty high note. I would sign up for that.
Yeah, I'm sure all Jets fans would. That would be exciting. I don't think that's going to be the announcement. Pretty sure Schefter would have broken that one by now, but yeah, I don't know. That is very cryptic, and I'm not exactly sure how to interpret that one, but I'm excited to see.
Yeah, we might have a topic already in the bank for Thursday after 1 o'clock rolls around. But I think that's going to do it for us on this episode. Any final thoughts here before we close out the first of the week?
Yeah, I'm excited for tomorrow's episode of Hard Knocks. It's going to be the Giants diving into the NFL draft. So I'm going to get my heart broken once again and watch them miss out on Drake May / Jaden Daniels once again. It's going to be a tough one for me, but it should be a fun one to react to on Thursday's episode.
Absolutely. So make sure if you're new here to subscribe to the channel, follow along with Anthony's Giants coverage over on Fireside Giants. You can follow me at Matt O'Leary NY or Talking Jets, doing content over there. But that's going to do it for us. I am Matt O'Leary. He is Anthony Rivardo, and we'll catch you next time.